Now, you've got some very strong opinions on how we live our digital lives.
Yes.
And the way we're going to be talking about that is through some sort of misconceptions that people have about that.
Okay.
So let's bring the first one up on stage.
Sure.
Being online constantly keeps me informed and connected. This makes sense to me because that's how you find out about world events.
Sure.
How you keep in touch with people who live across the world. What's wrong about this?
So to a certain extent, this is true. Being online does help us be more informed and connected. The problem is that we've become too informed and too connected, too many notifications. So something you can do is take control of your technology habits and decide how informed and how connected you want to be. Something that's important with this is waking up each morning and spending time away from your phone, even if it's for a few minutes, because that can set your brain up for success later in the day so you don't feel overwhelmed. Since September 2022, I've done just that. I've begun every morning by reading nonfiction before any phone or computer use. And what that does is that sets my brain up for success. So later on in the day, if I have a ton of notifications or a ton of emails at work, I know how to handle it more.
Well, what if you use your phone in a way that doesn't involve you dealing with your notifications? What if you're just, hanging out reading the news or something?
It actually doesn't matter because the phone does something called experience block. And so it blocks your brain from being able to actually experience real unmediated experiences. And so it's important to realize that screens can have a negative effect on your everyday life in the morning. There are some topics that relate to this called sleep drunkenness and sleep inertia. So when we first wake up, our brains are in this state that are really susceptible to whatever we do. And so if we're choosing to go on a phone, it makes us more addicted to our phone later on in the day. Since 2022, when I beginning my mornings with no phones, I've decreased my screen time by 65%. And that's because the morning habits set your tone for the rest of the day.
Well, what about basic things like the alarm clock? Do you recommend that people get like non-phone-based alarm clocks?
So this is funny. I have an analog alarm clock, which is great. But when I travel, I do use my phone. But this is when progression to analog is very difficult because I can't look at my phone, right? So whatever time I set my alarm for, I have to wake up because otherwise I can't look at my phone. So it does help to set some habits, but it is all about balance. And you don't have to be as extreme as I do. You could use your phone as an alarm in the morning, but just don't wake up and scroll and go on social media. Use the phone for its intended purpose. So in the morning when I go to the gym, I take the subway in New York City, and I don't go on my phone until I get to the gym and have to use it as a key card to check in. And then I don't start my music until I begin my workout. Those small little things, I'm directly interacting with my environment for 15 minutes on the way to the gym.
Wait, so you're riding the subway in New York without headphones on?
Yes.
Are you psychotic?
Yeah, a little bit, yes.
What does that feel like? I can't even get on a bus in Budapest without blocking it out.
Part of it is I love having headphones on, and sometimes there's times in the morning where there's someone crazy or something happening and you just have to put them in. But once in a while, even if it's for 2 minutes, to take them out and to realize, okay, I'm here, there's a world around me, and it's not just the headphones that I'm in, it's important to ground yourself.
All right, fair enough. I think we can move on to the next one. Notification culture doesn't affect me. I can multitask.
This is a common thing that I get from people. So in my work at Authentic Social in New York City, Amsterdam, across the United States and Europe, sometimes executives or younger people will say to me, well, notification culture doesn't affect me. I can multitask. It's just false because of the way that our brains are made up. Each ping that we get, if we're trying to get to this deeper level of thought or deeper level of work, what happens is a notification brings us back up to the surface. So if we're trying to scuba dive and dive down deep to get somewhere, we're coming back up to the surface with every notification. And devices are designed to be addictive. Unfortunately, big tech has really made it really difficult for us to manage our technology life. And I think the reason why you should trust me speaking about this is I'm not someone who is saying swear off phones or get rid of technology. My screen time during COVID-19 was so high, and I really wanted to take more control of my habits. So it's more about taking control and leveraging Do Not Disturb, leveraging different tools so that you don't let communication get in the way.
I mean, but don't you think that most of us have the fortitude to say, I'll deal with that later? Like, what's so negative about notification? What even is notification culture?
Notification culture is the notion that it's an ethical obligation to respond or look at every notification. We've become Pavloved or trained that when we hear a ping, we immediately want to look at our phone. And that takes us out of conversation, of connection, of everyday life. There's certain instances where it's important to have notifications ready. but it's not always something that should be leveraged.
So what's the first step that we can take to kind of free ourselves from that?
First is understanding the concept of hypercommunication. So this is a concept first popularized by French sociologist and philosopher Jean Baudrillard. I actually found the concept and ended up bringing some of it to the English-speaking internet because it wasn't really spoken about. It's this concept of excess inbound or outbound communication precipitated by technology, the acceleration of communication. There's 7 times more conversation streams today than there were just a few decades ago. And we have the same amount of time. So it's really about being intentional with how we're spending our time. I have social media, I use it, but it's important to make sure that we're intentional about how we leverage social media, texting, and notifications.
All right, I think we can move on to the next one. Pinging is more efficient than calling at work. Now, this might be a generational thing. I'm one of those like sort of sensitive millennials. I have the idea that it's rude to call people because you don't know what they're doing. You don't want to interrupt them. And I hate getting calls. When I get a call, I think something's wrong. So isn't just like, hey man, do you have 5 minutes? Isn't that just a better way of communicating than...
Sure. So I have a unique perspective here. I'm a Zillennial, so I'm in between Millennial and Gen Z, late 94. And I have a lot of cousins, and a lot of whom are younger than me. And I understand what it's like to not want to immediately go to a phone call, and we shouldn't. Really, the nuance with this is that pinging is sometimes more efficient than calling at work or in life. But there's 2 types of communication that I want to break down for you here. There's asynchronous communication and synchronous communication. Asynchronous communication is communication that exists outside of a steady stream. So think iMessage, text message, and the like. Synchronous communication is what we're doing right now. We're speaking live, we're speaking synchronously. But that can also happen during Zoom or during a phone call. So it's important to understand that if you're using asynchronous communication, that should be for an exchange of information. So pinging someone saying, can we change the meeting to 4 o'clock? Here's this file. Can you update this notification? But it shouldn't be used for, say that a boss says to their team, I want you to come up with some creative concepts for Tuesday. But then on Monday, that boss is pinging their employees every hour asking for something new. Well, how are we supposed to have that time to connect with our mind and to really get to that creative place if we're constantly being pinged and pinged and pinged? So it's about that balance.
Let me offer a different scenario. So say that, going back to your example of having a creative concept to get done by Monday, say your boss asks you like a sort of pressing question, like how do we sell shoes to people without feet? And then you have to think about that. Isn't doing that on the phone sort of painting someone into a corner and putting them in the spotlight unnecessarily to say like, hey, by the way, let's address this question, and then you have some time to think about it, reflect on it, and then get back to them?
Well, one of the things about phones is that they've made us into atomized individuals, thinking about ourselves and being in our own world. And sometimes we need to become more comfortable with difficult conversations and difficult situations, because if we're so used to comfort and having tons of time to think about something, well then when we're actually thrown into a client meeting or a date with someone, we're not going to know what to say if we don't have 15 minutes to think about it.
Do you have any brothers and sisters? Yeah, let me get back to you on that. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, cool. That's starting to make sense. All right, let's move on to the next one. Without social media, my relationships would disappear. You know, I'm not originally Hungarian. I don't know if you guys could tell, but I left India. You know, I've got people all over the world. That's how I stay in touch with everyone. I find out when someone's getting married or major milestones, or just keep in touch with them. Like, if I didn't have social media, literally, I don't know how I would get in touch with people I went to high school with.
Social media is an important and, in some ways, wonderful part of life. We're able to connect with people that we may have never been able to before. I've met people on planes and at conferences, and people from high school that I haven't been in touch with in a while, and we can see what's going on with them. But Victor Meyer-Schoenberger, an Oxford professor, speaks about a difficulty in modern society of the fact that we have so much information that we don't delete or we don't forget things. And so if we're looking at the person from high school's wedding and our friend from 10 years ago's dog, how are we going to focus on our meaningful relationship? So that's where it's coming from. Social media is an important tool to augment and learn about our society and to express yourself, but it's not something that should define your relationships.
Well, I mean, but if you're scrolling and then you find and then you see an update from a high school friend, you may not have even thought about them for many years. And like, oh yeah, I wonder how they're doing, and then you can get in touch with them. Like, that's a tool for that.
Sure, that's very true. But the relationships shouldn't disappear. Your most important relationships should not disappear without social media. And what we have to understand, too, is that social media makes us think that we sometimes are closer with people than they are. This parasocial relationship. And so sometimes parasocial relationships don't just happen with influencers. And this is something I'm very passionate about speaking about. We can have parasocial relationships with our friends. We can, without realizing it, consume a lot of content about a friend's life and forget to ask them about it, and forget to actually interact with them. So it's important to use social media, to your point, as a starting point, but that's not the only way to keep up a meaningful relationship.
All right, makes sense, fair enough. I didn't know that parasocial relationships were for non-famous people, too. That's weird. Maybe I'm just obsessed with all my friends. All right, let's move on. A digital detox is a quick fix for screen overload. Like digital detox, they're super popular. Everyone's like, hey, I'm going to just put this away for some time. Isn't that like cold turkey? Let me just sort of fix this.
This is a favorite topic of mine because when I do these projects in what I call progression to analog, I look at analog as more progress and not just digital as progress. And one of the things that I did in this, besides waking up every morning and reading before checking my phone, is I tried 81 plus hours in New York City without a phone. Now, on the subway, doing everything, it was very chaotic. And I thought, a digital detox, this will be great. So that day, I'm going to dinner with my grandmother and my uncle with my fiance, and I have to rely on him to use his phone to navigate me to get there. Then we get to the restaurant, and I say, we have a reservation at 6:15, and they say, we don't have a record of your reservation. Can you show the email to us on your phone? Didn't have my phone, tried to log into the Resi app, needed two-factor authentication. And so what I learned from that experience was that while it's great to learn to spend time off of your phone, the phone is a great tool, and it is something that's ingrained in modern society. So we have to come up with ways to leverage phone usage in a more nuanced way and not just detox and think that that's going to completely fix our issue.
It's so interesting that you're saying this because it's almost like a sort of line of thinking that you're not even allowed to have anymore, you know, without the risk of being a social pariah. How does that affect you? Do all your friends like, oh, here comes the analog girl? Like,
No, because I have a very balanced approach to it. I tried those detoxes and I actually hated them because I felt disconnected from the world. I wasn't speaking to my friends for several days, and it made me realize that technology does bring a lot of joy into my life, and I hadn't really realized that because I was focusing on the anxiety-ridden elements of it. But it is important to think about digital detoxes. It could be a starting point, but it's not an end point.
So what is the end point, really?
The end point is looking at phone usage in your everyday habits and figuring out, how do I want to make technology work for me? It's really a shame that we have to do all this work to make technology work for us. The devices, again, should not have been designed to be addictive. But you should figure out, how much screen time do I want to have per day? If you're sitting with a friend, do you want to be on your phone constantly, or do you want to be speaking with them? There's some research that shows that if you're texting friends all the time and you meet up in person, well, you end up being on your phone more because what is there to talk about? You've been texting all the time. So sometimes if there's a big story or some tea that I want to share with my friends, I'll wait until brunch or dinner to actually tell them that, because it's more fun to deliver via dinner or in person. It's the worst when you have a funny story or something big happened and you send it via text and your friend's doing something and then you get no response.
It's so last week, my wife actually told me one morning, she's like, hey, today, let's try not sending each other memes on Instagram all day. And then I was like, what, do you hate me? Because, like, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to, like, see something and not immediately send it to her? Like, it was a weird day, but we actually did end up spending a lot of meaningful time with each other.
It's nice.
So what's a good starting point to getting away from this? It's like once a week, once a day. Like, what do you recommend?
A good starting point is changing the morning habits, but it doesn't have to be every morning. So on my podcast, Progression to Analog, there's an episode called No Phones in the Bedroom, and I detail some ways that you can do this. And it's not just reading nonfiction. It could be any direct and unmediated experience. It could be exercise. It could be looking out the window for 5 minutes. Anything that grounds you in a sense of place. On busy mornings, sometimes it's literally, for me, just reading one page. For other people that I've helped, sometimes it literally is looking out the window for a minute or just centering yourself for a minute before you are going on your phone. So it's really a balance in looking at your everyday life and thinking, where are some ways that I've leveraged phones and technology that are useful to me? And where are some ways that I really feel this phone brain? I feel like I'm anxious when I'm on social media. I feel like I'm over-relying on it. Where are some areas that you might be able to improve?
It's so weird. Like when you're talking about having like a mindful experience, going back to during the pandemic, everyone started downloading those mindfulness apps, you know, the Headspace and the Calm or whatever. But then it ended up making me feel more anxious. It's like you get a notification at 8 in the morning, like, hey, remember to be mindful today.
Yep. The best way to describe that is it's create a problem, sell a solution. Let's create the problem of technology overtaking our lives, and then let's sell a bunch of solutions to fix it. I hate those types of things. It's all about the everyday life and figuring out what technology habits work for you.
Great. All right. I think we can move on to the last one over here. Digital life always leads to improvement. That's just the reality of our life now. Everything is super digital and connected and everything. We can't deny it. It's kind of like the air we breathe. And surely with all the innovations and the advancements that we've taken technologically, what's the problem here?
Yeah. So I've done some interesting research called media archaeology, and I've looked at thousands of pages of out-of-print technology magazines from over 9 decades. And what I was doing there was looking at some of the messages that have been peddled to us for how we're supposed to view and interact with technology. And some of the interesting images, there was one with a person's head, and in the back of it, it was a chip, and it said, imagine it. There were other ones where a man is holding a puppet, and the computer is its puppet, and it says, in control. So what's happened in the media over the past several decades is it's made us think that technology is going to smooth and fix everything, and that you're in complete control. That's the Silicon Valley, California technocratic ideal, and it's just not true. Technology fixes and helps a lot of areas of life, but the human element is something that makes us unique and is something that's beautiful. And projects in progression to analog are a great way to re-engineer your brain to get back to that. So one of the ways that I've done that is, again, like I mentioned before, I have some younger cousins, and one of my projects in progression to analog was I got a landline. I didn't do it like some of these articles you read just for clickbait that say, oh, I got rid of my phone for a month, I got a landline. I got it in addition to it, and I often use it to call my grandmother or my parents. And I sent a picture of it to my cousin Ella, and immediately she and her friends called me from the cafeteria in college, and they said, we can't believe that that works, we want one.
Are you in a museum?
Yeah, exactly. My cousin Caroline noticed that I was shooting film a lot, and she started to shoot film in college. And those two things, what they have in common is you are directly interacting with your environment, and there's a sense of anticipation with it. So with film, you're waiting for the photo. You're not just snapping every little thing. And it may not seem like these things are related, but they really are. It's about thinking about what are some analog ways, even if that's just meeting up with a friend to go for a hike and saying, let's wait until the end of the hike to take photos, instead of taking photos the whole time. Little fixes like that have improved my life. So when I go to an event, I'll go to the event, I'll do all my photos at the beginning because I still want to post stuff, but then the rest of the event, I'll just enjoy and I'll spend time off of my phone. And the way that we perceive time has changed with technology. There's something called pseudo-cyclical time that Guy Debord, French philosopher, speaks about. And when we're constantly looking at our phone and looking at what time it is and scheduling things and checking things, it doesn't allow room for creative thought and creative expression. If we're losing ourselves in the moment, that's the reason why we like vacations so much, why we like to get lost in play, why we look at childhood with such fondness. And that's what part of progression to analog can be.
It's also getting into something that's completely unfamiliar. You know, you become more of a person when you're on vacation.
Yeah.
Because you can't be on autopilot.
Yeah. And so where are some ways that we can find those pockets of joy and those pockets of this ancestral, spacious reality that once was in everyday life? Because actually for decades, since the 1800s, people have been predicting that this type of thing would happen with technology. I mean, in 1895, French polymath Gustave Le Bon, what was happening with people in society, the age of crowds, and that people were starting to not interact with each other in the way that he liked. And it's really interesting because the way that we interact with each other is changing because of technology, but it shouldn't define how we interact with each other.
I just want to go back to something you said earlier about the control cartoon that you were talking about with the puppeteer. I think it was easier to see ourselves in control of technology when technology was very sort of techy and sort of boring, if I can call it, like Windows 95. But then now, it's becoming so friendly and personable. Like, hey, I'm your digital assistant. And then it's talking like a person. Yeah. And then it just finds its way to like get into your crevices that way.
Well, it has to do with imagination. So when I was little, I loved the magazine American Girl. And there was a contest in it that you could say, if you could dream of any invention, what would it be? And I said, I would love to have a machine that could record our dreams. And that was so innocent. It was in the early 2000s. Now, if a kid did that today, the parent would look at it and be like, oh, God, that would be co-opted by Elon Musk or something, and it would become a disaster. So I think what's tough about today is that what's left to imagine if everything has been realized, and if every possibility is out there, and if every bit of knowledge is already out there? That's sometimes what gets me down a little bit. But what grounds me back into this sense of possibility and this sense of imagining new futures, and my work centers around designing a socio-technical future, is looking at how we can fuse people and technology together, where we can find the joy in everyday unmediated experience and human connection, and augment it with technology, and really control our own destinies.
All right, fair enough. I think that makes sense. Now, as I mentioned, we have a paper tiger on stage. It's not the elephant in the room, it's the tiger in the room. And this tiger represents the idea that living an analog life is a regression. It's bad, it's not good for you. But I think we're ready to kill this tiger,
so.
right?
Yeah.
I need something to break it with, though. Hold on.
I'm ready.
Here we go, I found something. Yeah. This is nice and subtle, right? I would like to give you the opportunity to break it. You want to do that?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. 3, 2, 1. Yes. Oh my God.
Keep going.
I think you got it, Caitlin. All right, thank you so much. Now, please give it up for the first speaker of Brain Bar 2024, Caitlin Begg, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.